Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this final day of the Mahamudra teachings. Thank you, Glen, for teaching us. I would just like to remind you that if you find this teaching beneficial, and you'd like to help support our activities and teachers, then you can practice generosity. The details are in the middle of the event page on the Dharma Friends website, and I will also send the PayPal details through chat. May we all have a very fruitful final day of teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomer. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone back here to this last day of this Mahamudra retreat, realizing the nature of mind. Let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this first session today. We'll start with a meditation, an emptiness meditation, focusing on me, the person. And then we'll follow that with a review of some of the main points from yesterday's sessions. And then we'll continue on in the text into the section titled The Conclusion, which covers the end of the meditation and then goes on into the post-meditation. We'll do a meditation, a nature of mind meditation, similar to ones we did earlier in this weekend. And then we'll continue in the text a little bit into this, what's called illusory-like appearances, what we do in post-meditation regards this emptiness practice, and then time for question answer at the end of the session. So let's begin with a meditation. And yesterday I mentioned that one way to approach emptiness is via the insight into impermanence. And so in this meditation, I'd like to take advantage of that, just bring in a little bit of impermanence into the meditation and see if it's helpful in coming into an insight into emptiness. So let's do that practice now. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Allowing your awareness to descend into the body. And simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. All the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Releasing all activities of the mind. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest. To come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. And again, we begin with a virtuous, pure mind by going for refuge and generating bodhicitta, and preceding that with the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. This precious life of leisure and opportunity is rare and easily lost. And the world and those within it are impermanent. I too will die soon. The results of my virtuous and non-virtuous actions will without fail ripen within me. And there is no genuine happiness to be found within the abodes of samsara. And so I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And by my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And so we begin our Vipassana practice of emptiness, investigating me, the person who's meditating here. This me who's meditating here, how does it appear to exist? Does it seem to exist objectively, independently, from its own side? Just rest in that experience of being me, the meditator. The me who's meditating here. Now, the body is a constant flow of physical change, changing moment by moment. Just rest in that experience of the flow of change in the body. Now, is there a me to be found in that flow of physical change? Look closely. The mind is a constant flow of mental experience, changing moment by moment. And so just rest in that experience of the flow of mental experience, of flow of the mind, the constant changing experiences of the mind. Now, is there a me to be found in that flow of mental experience, that constant flow? Look closely. Yet, other than the constant flow of physical change that is called the body, and the constant flow of mental experience that is called the mind, what else is there here? If there's nothing more than the constant flow of physical change called the body, and the constant flow of mental experience that is called the mind, then where is the me who is meditating? If you can't find the me who's meditating, simply rest in the experience of not finding, knowing it's nowhere to be found. And even if you didn't find the me who's meditating, that doesn't mean there's no me. The me who's meditating exists. The me is a mere name, merely imputed by conception. The me is merely labeled on the basis of the flow of physical change that is the body and the flow of mental experience that is the mind. The merely labeled me is sitting here meditating. And we can bring the meditation to a close. So let's review some of the main points from earlier this weekend. We're looking at the Vipassana part of Sutra Mahamudra. And here the Panchen Lama is going to introduce the ultimate nature of the mind, based on instructions he received from his root guru, Sangye Yeshe. And so here, with regard to ultimate nature of the mind, since we're in Sutra Mahamudra, we're talking about emptiness as directly explained in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings. Whereas in Tantra Mahamudra, the ultimate nature of mind is this clear light mind that is indivisible from emptiness. And in the first section of this Vipassana presentation, there were some examples of how to introduce the ultimate nature of the mind from the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition, where we saw instructions like, look for the mind. Is it inside the body? Is it outside the body? Is it something that arises, abides, or ceases? And the second one was saying, look every part of the body for it. Can you find it anywhere? And if we find that it's not to be found in the body, it doesn't have a color or shape, then one sees the nature of the mind. And so here, remember, merely realizing that the mind has no color or shape is not directly a realization of the emptiness of the mind. But as His Holiness mentioned in his commentary, that these types of instructions are merely stages in a meditation method that ultimately leads to understanding the abiding nature of the mind, to be only an extinction of concrete, findable, true, and inherent existence. So these instructions are leading us towards realizing the emptiness of the mind. The mind is empty of inherent existence. And so then the second part of the presentation is a presentation of this emptiness that we are trying to come to realize with respect to the mind. And we saw here that in the Madhyamika philosophical system, which is the basis of this presentation, the words selflessness and emptiness mean the same thing, meaning no inherently existent self, no inherently existent phenomena. Whereas in other philosophical systems in Buddhism, they are not synonymous. So we have to be a little bit careful when we see this word selflessness or no self in terms of what it means. But here, no self or selflessness means no inherently existent self, or in other words, same as emptiness. And we saw here that in terms of establishing the view of emptiness, then often they use a phenomena in the text to establish it. But when we come to meditate on emptiness, we start by looking for me, the person. And there are a number of ways to do that. The way that's mentioned here in the text is one of the classic methods, and it's sometimes called same or different. that if there is an independent me here, then it must be findable. It must be either the same as the body and mind or different than the body and the mind. And here Nagarjuna is saying that if we search, the person is not the body, the person is not the mind, the person is not the body and the mind together. Yet apart from the body and the mind, what person is there? Meaning it's not different than the body and the mind either. So since the person is not the same as the body and the mind, not different than the body and the mind, then the person is not findable. Person does not inherently exist. And this is usually systematized in the meditation text through these 4 essential points. That we first need to identify this object of negation, meaning to get a clear picture of how we see ourselves existing as this independent me. Because it's this independent me that we need to look for. So we need to know what we're looking for. If we don't have a clear picture, then it'll be like shooting an arrow without seeing the target. We won't know whether or not that independent me is here or not. And then we do the search, either is it the same as the body and the mind or different than the body and the mind? And if we don't find it in either of those 2 places, it means it is not findable, means the independent me does not exist. And so how to do that in meditation, we saw here that using a very calm, clear, focused mind with a very subtle awareness, we investigate and look for this me. And if we come to the point we don't find it, there's this mere absence of the me that we're looking for, then when that becomes clear, we hold that experience. That's an experience of emptiness. We hold that as long as we can, allow it to penetrate deeper into our mind. If that experience fades out or we get distracted, then we go back and do the search again. If we get to the point of not finding, hold that experience again. So this is how we sustain what's called space-like meditative equipoise, because the experience of emptiness is an experience like space. It's a mere absence and not finding. And then the text goes on to say that when we come out of meditation, then we realize that the me that exists, that appears to our mind due to being under control of ignorance, doesn't exist because we didn't find it. But that doesn't mean there's no person at all. The person does exist. And how does the person exist? It's like imputing snake onto a striped road, meaning that the person is something not findable in the body and the mind because it's merely labeled on the basis of the body and the mind. It's merely imputed by conception. And therefore it's empty like an illusion, because an illusion is something that does not exist as it appears. Similarly, me, the person, does not exist as it appears. It appears, the me appears to exist independently, but we realize it's not like that. And so we develop conviction of that outside of meditation, and then we go back and meditate again. So the emptiness practice is alternating between the space-like emptiness meditation and in daily life, seeing the me as like an illusion. And if we practice both of those together, then we can really progress in the emptiness practice, because each one of those will enhance the other. And then the text goes on to say that once we've gained some experience with this, with regard to me, the person, then we move out from there and we investigate other persons, other phenomena, including the body and the mind. And the text goes on to talk about investigating mind, because in Mahamudra, they really focus on the mind primarily in establishing emptiness, in meditating on emptiness. And so here also then we see a presentation of how to look for the mind. And so we saw here that as with me, the person, the way in which our mind appears, it seems to exist there independently, doesn't seem to rely on anything else. And we just apprehend it in that way, to exist as it appears. We never question that. But if we investigate the mind, we'll come to realize that it's a falsity, meaning it does not exist as it appears. And then we saw some analogies there to highlight that just like a rosary or an army seem to be existing there objectively, if we look closely, there's no rosary to be found there, because the rosary is a mere designation on a collection of beads. And similarly, the army is nowhere to be found there in the individuals, because it's a mere designation on the basis of a collection of individuals. And similarly, the mind is not findable, because the mind is something merely designated on the basis of a collection of many moments of clarity and awareness. And so therefore we can come to this insight that mind does not exist as it appears. And so that's where we left the text. And that actually then concludes the Vipassana part of the presentation in Sutra Mahamudra. And so we come now then to conclusion. And the conclusion is twofold. First, there's the conclusion of the actual meditation we were doing, the Shamatha Vipassana meditation. And then following that, the post-meditation, what we do outside of meditation. And so in terms of dedication, here we have from our prayers for meditation, some examples of dedication prayers. So often we find a saying, particularly in the Lojong system of teachings, that two things are important with regard to meditation: what we do at the beginning and what we do at the end. And what we do at the beginning is we set the motivation. And here in Mahamudra, being a Mahayana practice, we go for refuge, generate bodhicitta. And what we do at the end that's important is dedicate our efforts. And so here we see two things as part of the dedication prayers in the prayers for meditation. The first 4-line verse is dedicating all of this effort in meditation towards enlightenment. So due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of Guru Buddha, or in other words, to achieve enlightenment, and lead all sentient beings without exception into that enlightened state. So that is paralleling the aspiration of bodhicitta at the beginning of the meditation. But then also, often we find that following that is another dedication, that this aspiration of bodhicitta, that it continues to grow. So may the supreme dual bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And so this is what we can do at the end of the meditation, to seal the meditation, to dedicate all of our efforts towards that goal. It really directs all of that effort we put towards that goal that we're aspiring to through the bodhicitta motivation. And here in the text, it sort of says that, exactly that point. It says, dedicate whatever virtue that has arisen from having meditated on Mahamudra, together with your ocean-like collection of past, present, and future virtue, towards unsurpassable great enlightenment. So that is the dedication at the end of the meditation. And then comes post-meditation. But before we go to the post-meditation, let's do another meditation. And we'll go back to the first part of the Vipassana presentation, where we had those examples of meditating on the mind through these oral instructions we find in the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition. These instructions like investigate, where is the mind? Is it inside the body? Is it outside? Does it have a color? Does it have a shape? And so on. So I'd like to do one more of those meditations now, because now in the last day or so, we've been doing a lot of the other type of emptiness practice. So let's go back to that first type, just to get a flavor of that again. So if you'd like to find a nice, comfortable posture, let's do that meditation now. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. and relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And then allowing the eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you, keeping the eyes soft and relaxed. And then simply release all appearances, allowing the mind to come to rest, resting in awareness itself, simply knowing that you're aware. Simply resting in the mind itself, resting in that awareness. The awareness or mind that you're resting in, where is it located? Is awareness inside the body? Look closely. Is awareness located inside the head? Again, look closely. Is awareness located outside the body? How big is awareness? Is it very small or is it very large? Just look. Does awareness have a physical limit, an edge or a boundary to it? And is there anything outside of awareness? Is awareness nowhere because it is in fact everywhere? Is awareness located in physical space? Or is physical space located within awareness? Look closely. And then release all investigation and allow the mind to come to rest. Resting in awareness. Resting in that open, spacious stillness of awareness. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Let's return to the text and have a look at what to do post-meditation after we come out of emptiness practice. The text says, having familiarized yourself in that way in meditative equipoise. And here the word meditative equipoise means balance, means ideally meditative equipoise here means a union of shamatha and vipassana observing emptiness. That would be ideal. Then during post-meditation, realize well by investigating with subtle discernment the way in which any appearances that dawn as objects of the six collections of consciousness are appearing. So the six collections of consciousness is the presentation of the six consciousnesses, the five sense consciousnesses and the mental consciousness. So the sense consciousness is the visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile. Because we experience five types of sense objects: visual, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations. So we can talk about five sense consciousnesses which apprehend those. But then also we can talk about mental consciousness. And mental consciousness is the aspect of the mind that perceives all mental activity, like thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images. So these six consciousnesses are not six different minds. They are six aspects of one mind. We've only got one mind. And the aspect of our mind that apprehends visual objects is called visual consciousness, and so on. So we are to investigate out of the meditation how things are appearing to us, either through our senses or through conceptually. How are our thoughts and emotions and memories and mental images? How are all visual objects and sounds, how are all these things appearing to us? And when we look, we see that everything, no matter whether it's mental or sensory, appears to exist independently, objectively, from their own side. And then it goes on to say, through such investigation, the way in which they actually exist, So even though they're appearing to exist independent of us, if we investigate based on our understanding and experience of emptiness and meditation, we'll see that the way in which they actually exist is as dependent arisings without an independent essence. They're not existing independently, even though they appear to, because we've come to understand and realize that in meditation, that there's nothing findable. And so then that will dawn nakedly and vividly. When we do this investigation based on our understanding and experience of emptiness, when we look and investigate, it will become very obvious and clear to us that they are actually dependent arisings, that they're actually merely imputed. They're not existing as they appear. And so it says, through realizing that, meaning realizing that things are merely labeled, merely imputed, your ascertainment of ultimate nature will increase. So realizing that things are like an illusion, meaning they're not existing as they appear, that will increase our understanding of emptiness. So that will feed back into our emptiness practice later. And so there's a quote here from J. Mitra Yogi, says, recognizing whatever dawns is essential point of view. So the essential point of the view of emptiness is to recognize whatever dawns, to recognize that whatever appears to us does not exist as it appears, that it's like an illusion, that it's merely labeled, merely imputed, that it's a dependent arising. And that will then deepen our understanding and realization of emptiness through realizing that, recognizing that. And then the text goes on and says, in brief, do not grasp onto any of those things which appear to you, even your own mind. So whatever's appearing to us, even our own mind, don't grasp onto it. Don't simply accept those appearances and grasp onto them as existing independently. And so therefore we are to constantly sustain our practice by alternating the space-like meditative equipoise of ascertaining the way in which they actually exist with post-meditation of undeniable dawning of dependently related agents and actions. So we are to sustain practice by alternating those two. In meditation, space-like realize emptiness, that things, the way in which they actually exist, they're not independently existent. So continually to ascertain and realize emptiness meditation, and then outside of meditation, in post-meditation, recognize things are like an illusion, that things are actually dependent arisings. They're merely labeled, merely imputed, but they still, of course, function. We're not saying merely labeled means they don't really exist. There are agents and actions there that operate, that function, but they're dependent arisings. They're merely labeled. And so this is what we are to do in our practice, is to alternate between realizing emptiness, the way things which they actually exist, and realizing that all things which appear are dependent arisings. They're merely labeled, merely imputed, and so forth. And then the text goes on to say, through knowing how to sustain meditative equipoise and post-meditation in this way, it is necessary to familiarize yourself in meditative equipoise, having unified the ultimate nature of all phenomena of samsara and nirvana as indivisibly one. And in post-meditation, to familiarize yourself, having unified the conventional nature as being illusory-like mere appearances. And so we are simply then in meditation to familiarize ourselves with emptiness, that all phenomena of samsara and nirvana are indivisibly one in terms of their ultimate nature is emptiness. So just to familiarize ourselves over and over again, no matter what we investigate in meditation, they all come down to lack of inherent existence, to come to realize emptiness. And then in post-meditation, familiarize ourselves with whatever's appearing as being illusory-like mere appearances. That everything that appears is like an illusion. It appears to exist independently, but we ascertain that actually that's not actually how it exists. They are merely labeled. Therefore, they're mere appearances. And then there's a very famous quote here from Aryadeva, who was the main disciple of Nagarjuna. And I think this is coming from his emptiness text, 400 verses on emptiness, I think. He says, whoever is the seer of one thing They are said to be the seer of all. That which is the emptiness of one, that is the emptiness of all. So if we realize the emptiness of one thing, we can easily realize the emptiness of everything else. And the emptiness of one thing, that's the same emptiness of all phenomena. All phenomena are empty of inherent existence. So we don't need to fully realize emptiness, therefore, based on this quote, we don't need to realize individually the emptiness of every single phenomena, because by realizing the emptiness of one thing, then we'll be able to just simply realize the emptiness of all other phenomena as well. And then one or two more things, and then we'll go to some question answer. And so the text goes on to say, in that way, it is true that from the perspective of a correct meditative equipoise upon ultimate nature, meaning it's true that from the perspective of a direct realization of emptiness, there is freedom from the elaborations of the extremes of existence and non-existence and so forth with respect to samsara and nirvana. Meaning that actually, when we're directly realizing emptiness, nothing else is appearing, because the only thing appearing is emptiness. So we could mistakenly think that then nothing exists, because the only thing appearing is emptiness. However, it says, however, after arising from that meditation on emptiness, when you investigate, it is undeniable that there are dependently related agents and actions that exist as being merely imputed by name, and they dawn naturally, and they naturally dawn as being like a dream, like a mirage, like a reflection of a moon in water, and like an illusion. So even though when we're investigating all these phenomena in meditation, and when we come to realize the ultimate nature, emptiness, the only thing appearing is emptiness, that doesn't mean we've negated all phenomena. That doesn't mean they don't exist. Because when we come out of it, it's undeniable that there are dependently related agents and actions that function, but they exist as being merely imputed by name. And they appear, because now we've had an insight into emptiness, it's like being lucid in a dream. If we're lucid in a dream, then things still appear to exist independent in the dream. But now, because we're lucid, we'll understand that they don't exist as they appear. They're illusory. Similarly here, if we've realized emptiness and we come out of that, then it says they naturally dawn as being like a dream. Now, if we haven't realized emptiness, they're not going to naturally appear as being like a dream or like an illusion. They'll appear like they're existing independently. But because we've realized emptiness, then for us, they'll be like a dream, like a mirage, like a reflection in the moon in water, like an illusion. Because these are all analogies of things that don't exist as they appear, that are easy to understand, that they don't exist as they appear. And so similarly, therefore, through the realization of emptiness in daily life, we'll be able to really see things as like an illusion, meaning not existing as it appears. We know that, even though it does appear to exist independent of us, we know through our experience of emptiness that that's not how they exist. This appearance it's like a dream, it's like an illusion, like a mirage. But again, that doesn't mean that this world is sort of doesn't really exist. There is agents and actions, there is a functioning world, but it's like an illusion, like a dream. And so here we saw that we find that middle way between the two extremes, between the extreme of existence and the extreme of non-existence. And then the text goes on to say, when emptiness is not obscured by appearances, and when appearances are not blocked by emptiness, at that time, the excellent path of emptiness and dependent arising being equivalent becomes manifest. So what does that mean? It means now, for us, emptiness is obscured by appearances, meaning that for us now, appearances are suggesting to us that in fact things exist independently. So that's blocking emptiness. And then because we don't understand emptiness, it seems to indicate that emptiness means nothing really exists. So then emptiness blocks appearances for us now, because it seems like either things are real and independent and function, or they're empty and they don't really exist. So we're stuck in these two extremes of existence and non-existence. So emptiness and appearances for us now seem to be contradictory. Either there is a functioning world or things are empty. And that's what it means by emptiness obscuring appearances and appearances blocked by emptiness. We don't understand emptiness. But when we investigate, reflect on emptiness, meditate on emptiness, then at a certain point, our understanding of emptiness will be complete, meaning that at that point, which is mentioned here in the text, then emptiness is not obscured by appearances, meaning that now, through our deepening understanding and experience of emptiness, when we see things, that will, from those seeing things, we'll know they're like an illusion. Therefore, that will enhance our understanding of emptiness. And when we realize emptiness, we'll realize that doesn't mean nothing exists. It means actually things are dependently existent. So appearances are not going to be blocked by emptiness. And so therefore, we'll see that emptiness and dependent arising are equivalent. They're like two sides of a coin. They're not contradictory. Now, at the beginning, it seems like if things are empty, then nothing really exists. And if things exist, they can't be empty. But the real correct understanding is, because things are empty, they can exist and can function. And because things exist, they must be empty. For example, this cup, if it exists inherently, if it had a unique nature of being a cup from its own side, then it couldn't change. It couldn't become anything else. You couldn't create it, you couldn't destroy it, it couldn't function. But because it has no unique nature from its own side of being a cup, therefore it can change, it can function. You can create it, you can destroy it. Therefore it can function. And this understanding here is the classic line in the Heart Sutra, which says, form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form also is not other than emptiness. That form or body and emptiness are like two sides of a coin. This is a measure of understanding emptiness. And then Panchen Lama quotes from Tsongkhapa and Nagarjuna on this very point. He says, as said by J. Tsongkhapa, so Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gluk school of Tibetan Buddhism, 14th century. Tsongkhapa says, as long as the assertions of appearances being undeceiving dependent arisings and emptiness are understood to be two separate things, meaning if our understanding is such that they are contradictory, either there is things functioning or things are empty, as long as they appear individually, they seem to be contradictory, you have still not understood the intent of the sage. Sage here, another word for Shakyamuni Buddha, meaning you still haven't understood emptiness. But then he says, when without alternating, as soon as the ascertaining consciousness merely sees dependent arisings as non-deceptive and all modes of grasping to the object are destroyed, then your investigation of the view is complete. Meaning that when we simply see appearances, and through just merely seeing appearances, we realize that they are merely imputed, therefore we release all grasping to them as existing independently, then our investigation of the view is complete, because then appearances and emptiness are equivalent, because by seeing appearances, we realize they must be empty. And then Nagarjuna says, someone who, through understanding the emptiness of phenomena, sees cause and effect as tenable, this is more amazing than amazing, this is more marvelous than marvelous. So to hold these two ideas in one mind, that everything is empty of inherent existence and everything functions, to hold those two things together is amazing. because they seem very much to be contradictory. And I sometimes still hear that now, you know, people who supposedly have studied and meditated on emptiness for a long time, I still hear people sometimes say, oh, it doesn't matter because everything's empty. I mean, that is completely the wrong understanding. We haven't, if that's what we think, oh, it doesn't matter because everything's empty, then we haven't understood the intent of the sage. We haven't understood emptiness. The understanding is because things are empty, everything matters. And because things matter, they must be empty. That's the correct understanding. But to really come to that real understanding is not easy. This is the middle way between those two extremes of existence and non-existence. And it takes some time of study, reflection, and meditation. But when we can come to that point, we have really, as Tsongkhapa says, our investigation of the view, the view of emptiness is complete. So that's all I wanted to cover in the text. So now we have time for question answer. So again, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and Tomer will ask them and I'll try to answer them. So do we have any questions?
Yes. Okay, so a question from Chaya. The experience that has arisen in meditation of awareness is that awareness is everywhere, without boundaries, without beginning, without end. An infinite space of awareness within which all appearances arise. If so, on what does awareness itself depend?
On appearances. For example, subject-object. Subject can only exist relative to object, but also awareness is within time. And so there are many moments. So awareness is depending on every single moment of awareness. So there are many parts to awareness, like we saw in the reasoning there before in terms of the mind, that the mind or awareness, we can use the word awareness, is merely labeled on a collection of many moments. And so we can, that way, or we can say it's merely labeled on the basis, the mind or awareness, I mean, we're using the word mind and awareness interchangeable here. We can say the mind is also merely labeled on the qualities of clarity, clear and knowing, or clarity and awareness. So in that sense, I mean, it's awareness or mind is not a physical phenomenon, but it's still a functioning phenomena. So therefore, there is causes and conditions and parts. All functional phenomena are dependent on causes and conditions and parts. So the awareness that we have now is dependent on the awareness of a moment ago and so forth. And the parts are the moments of awareness. So in that sense, dependent on those things, and also awareness is also something merely labeled, a mere name.
Okay, thanks.
Just to add one more thing to that. But here we need to be careful because awareness, this word awareness in Dzogchen is used normally or often to mean very subtle, clear light mind. And then to answer this question becomes impossible, because the very subtle, clear light mind, or Rikpa, as it's known in Dzogchen, which is Tibetan for awareness, is beyond time and it's not individuated. So it's beyond existence, non-existence, it's beyond conception. So you can't really answer these sort of questions for that. But we're not in that context here, so we can answer that question. We're talking Sutra Mahamudra, and we're talking awareness, meaning just the mind we have now.
Okay. Thanks. Next question from Tzlil Naviv. Can you please go through the logic of why, when something exists from its own side, it cannot change and function?
If it exists from its own side, means it's not dependent on anything else. It means it can't interact with anything else. Therefore, it can't become anything else. So if we just keep it very simple in terms of causality, causes and conditions, that everything is dependent on causes and conditions. So if it exists from its own side, means it exists independently, it means it wouldn't be dependent on causes and conditions, which means it couldn't change. But the thing is that the lower philosophical systems, and it's not so obvious, we have to think about this point. I mean, this is the logic, but it's not so easy to understand that, because in fact, the lower philosophical systems, Vaibhashika Sautrantika, see no contradiction in the fact that actually things do exist from their own side and they are dependent on causes and conditions and they function. So for the lower philosophical systems, that's okay. But here we're saying that actually doesn't work. But we have to really think about it. We have to really come to appreciate again emptiness and dependent arising. So we really need to reflect on these three modes of dependent arising: causes, conditions, parts, and particularly the labeling. And then the flip side of that, emptiness. And then we'll start to appreciate this more and more. Because remember, Nagarjuna said that someone who can understand this, what the question you're asking, someone who can understand that, that's more amazing than amazing. That's more marvelous than marvelous. It's like amazing that you can actually appreciate that. So again, it's not so easy, but that's the reasoning. But we really need to then reflect on that again and again and again, and meditate on it as well.
Okay, thanks. We're waiting on more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, something that I was thinking when you answered the higher question is that when we say things exist by being labeled through being labeled by the mind. For example, like I said, pen exists through being labeled by the mind. But when we talk about the mind being labeled by itself, then it seems like the mind already needs to exist in order to label.
But again, here, for example, we're not saying like this pen here is merely labeled. But does that mean if I stop looking at the pen, it goes out of existence? Does it mean I have to be labeling every moment for it to exist? No, that's not what merely label means. We're talking about how things exist. And we're saying that things don't exist beyond the conceptual framework. We're not talking about the psychological fact whether or not we happen to be labeling in that moment. So we need to be a little bit careful there. Otherwise, we can sort of end up in a wrong understanding. So because awareness, I mean, awareness is a word, and that refers to something. And so that's already a label, the word awareness. And so that is, we've created that concept and applied it to understand something, to understand experience or something. So it doesn't mean that in that moment, it has to be being labeled for that to exist. Again, the example of the pen. So we just need to be a little bit careful on that point.
Okay, thanks. Yes, there's some questions now from Dana. In the meditation, it felt like awareness is inside of physical space, and also physical space is inside of awareness. Also, it felt like awareness has no boundaries. So that was more like a comment. Yeah.
Good, very good. Again, with these sorts of meditations, that style, which is coming really from Mahamudra Dzogchen tradition, with those sort of questions, you know, like where is it? Does it have a color and a shape? It's not like, oh, I need to get the right answer. I wonder what the right answer is. That's not what they're designed for. It's not a matter of getting the right answer. It's simply using those questions to guide us to come to an insight into the nature of the mind. And so when we have certain experiences, then we check them out. And if we have a qualified teacher, we can ask the teacher, you know, I did this meditation, I had this experience. Am I going in the right direction, or do I need to change something, or what does it mean, and so forth, so that they can sort of guide us. Because sometimes with these sorts of meditations, people really go off on a tangent. You know, they, for example, quite common to just sort of blank the mind and end up in this sort of blank, nebulous state where nothing's really appearing, and people just rest there in complete dullness, and they go, oh, I'm realizing the ultimate nature of the mind. In fact, I think I'm realizing Rigpa, I'm realizing the very subtle clear light mind, because nothing's appearing. And so we're just deluding ourselves. So it's very important, particularly when we're doing these sorts of practices, and if we're doing them intensely, to get some guidance. But yeah, very good. Those experiences, that's good. Just keep practicing on that. And they can really lead us to an authentic realization of the ultimate nature of the mind, that the mind is empty of inherent existence.
Thanks. Next one is from Hila, and she asked for clarification. So we say that all phenomena are impermanent and empty, but except the clear light mind.
Well, not all phenomena are impermanent, because we have permanent phenomena. So, I mean, emptiness is a phenomena, but it's not impermanent. So we need to be very precise here. All functioning phenomena, which means impermanent. So all phenomena are not impermanent. But when we talk about clear light mind, and we're talking about it from the perspective of clear light mind, from that perspective, then we're beyond time and space, because all of time and space come from that. If we want to talk about that from our perspective, then we can probably say that it's impermanent and changing moment by moment. But not if we're speaking from the perspective of the clear light mind itself. So we have to be very careful how we phrase that. And this is a little bit different what we find, I think, in Dzogchen Mahamudra. They really talk from the perspective of the very subtle mind. And so we often hear phrases like, very subtle mind is beyond being permanent and impermanent, it's beyond being existing and not existing and all that, which is true. But then I think in the Geluk, particularly if we're not in Tantra yet, we're talking from the perspective of the conditioned mind. And then we can also say that the very subtle mind is also changing moment by moment and so forth. But that's from a different perspective. So we need to be a little bit careful on that point.
Okay, thanks. Next one is from Dror, and it reads, maybe the terminology is wrong, but if my awareness is limitless, and also everyone else's awareness is limitless, does it mean that all awareness exists on one another? I think it means the same.
I mean, if awareness was physical, that probably would be the implication, wouldn't it? I mean, if awareness had spatial properties, then that probably could be a consequence. But one of the questions we asked in awareness, is it have a shape or a color? Does it have any physical characteristics? And we look, and I think we'll come to see that there's no spatial characteristics. So the awareness is not located in my head. It's not located out there in space. It's not located anywhere, because it doesn't have any physical characteristics. And so then based on that, then we may not have that logical conclusion that we would if we assumed that awareness had spatial physical properties.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions? Otherwise, it's time for a break.
There's one more in the chat.
Okay, we'll take one more question, then we'll take a break.
Sure. This one is from Dana. Can you please explain again the example with the pen? How does the pen exist when we are not in the room?
Well, I mean, if you've already said, how does the pen exist? Then like everything, it's merely label. We still, but the real question here, and this is what the real question we need to ask here is, who's going out the door? Because often people ask this question, they say, well, but if I go outside the room, the pen's still there, isn't it? And they're often asking that question on the basis of grasping to an independent me. So if there really is an independent me walking out the room, then sure, there is a pen existing there independently once I've left the room. In fact, this is the assertion of the lower philosophical systems in Buddhism. Yes, the pen exists there objectively when we walk out the room. But the real question to ask here to get a good answer is, who's the me walking out the room? If you answer that experientially, then you'll have your answer. And again, it's not an intellectual thing, you know. See, this is the problem. One of the problems with emptiness is people who are really philosophers, they want to figure it out. They want to figure it out intellectually, this idea of emptiness. And then they go round and round and round and round and round and not get anywhere. We can sort of intellectually get an idea about what emptiness infers, but to actually know emptiness, you can't know it directly intellectually. So therefore, we can only know it directly through experience in meditation. And so therefore, otherwise we'll just get caught up in our conceptual mind trying to understand emptiness conceptually, and we'll get stuck. We won't really get to know for sure what emptiness really means, because we need to see it directly, and that's beyond the conceptual intellectual mind. That's why we saw earlier in this part of Vipassana, it said we need to go through hearing, contemplation, and meditation to come to a direct insight into emptiness. Okay, let's break there. In the next session, I want to look at what's called two strategies, long-term strategy, short-term strategy, in terms of this Vipassana practice of emptiness. And we'll do a couple more meditations as well, Vipassana meditations. But let's take a break and come back at 10:15.